Greetings. Black Light here. Last video I was talking about white supremacy is supreme technology. It could also be classified as supreme technology. I mean, he uses weapons of mass destruction to help control the minds of the people also. But he basically uses technology. That's how he at one time was gaining resources all over the planet. This brother, you see his name on the screen. And he's going to further explain somewhat in detail how they do it, how the Caucasian does it. Now, y'all young brothers pay attention to this. Okay? Here we go.
Run this economy are thinking. Not that they're necessarily right or wrong, but you have to get an idea of what they're talking about and what they're thinking. And then on the third page, what we have done is broken down to you the schematic of what happened to South Korea in particular, but what happens to all of the countries now in the IMF system. And what I would like to do for 5 minutes is to see if I can take the first page and schematically put it down on this blackboard. If I have some chalk. Yeah, I'm going to write on this one until you get it here. Because what I want to do is we want to go over it schematically so we can follow it. And the purpose of this is just to expose you to some information so that we can get an idea of what it is we're dealing with. And as we begin to analyze this, we can begin to see those pieces of information that are needed by us so that we can better understand what is going on around us. And then we're going to discuss it. And what I'd like to do is present the material to you. And after presenting the material, then we can have a question and answer period around it, and maybe we can expand on it in a little more detail there. And what this is a schematic that reflects what actually has happened and what is happening. This is not a schematic that I put together from some hypothetical theory or formula that I want to work out of, and therefore this is what he says. Now, in order to look at the World Economic Order, let's look at the first page, and you notice on your first page in your upper left-hand corner there's some information here. And what does it say? It says raw materials, labor, and technology. Because it is raw materials, labor, and technology that make a community run, makes a country run, and make the world run. Stock and bonds and futures and all these derivatives don't make the world run. You have to have human beings digging the soil, planting crops, harvesting the crops, digging up mines, converting metal from the oxides into metal, and making things. So that's what makes the world run. That's why we start with raw material, labor, and technology. Then let's go to number one. Number one is colonialism. In order for you to understand what is happening to you, or the so-called World Economic Order today, we got to go back at least 500 years minimum. And in that 500 years, we're going to deal with colonialism. And if you notice, colonialism is noted here, and we put an arbitrary date of 1500 to 1945, and that's labeled number one. You notice number two is labeled what? Raw materials, labor, and technology. Why do we indicate that? Because of colonialism, the ability in this case of white people, European, predominantly from Western Europe, England, France, Germany, Spain, and Portugal primarily. These countries around 1500 to 1945, because of a number of reasons, they were successful in leaving Europe and beginning to conquer and bring other people under their control and taking their land. And in the process of colonialism, to go into a country, to take one's natural resources, to use the labor of one's persons, and to use the technology, it was this process that made what you call the United States, what you call Western Europe, and later Japan, strong economic countries in the 1900s. So let's look at number two, raw materials. They come to America, let's say, they come to Africa, they take your wood, they take your minerals and your food. By bringing these raw materials back to Europe, they're able to now eat well, they're able to build their homes, they're able to build factories. And of course, we know about the labor, the free labor that the Europeans and America use in which to build up this country. African people, you know, in synopsis, built the roads here, they built the levees for the river, they planted the food, they planted the cotton, they harvested the cotton. And why is the raw material and labor important? Because what was the foundation of the so-called Industrial Revolution that you read about in the educational system here? The foundation of the Industrial Revolution is when America and Western Europe begins to so-called build up industrially. And that building up industrially was based on what? The raw materials taken primarily from the Caribbean first and then from Africa. It was fueled by the physical labor of Africans, unskilled labor and skilled labor. Africans, when they went to Africa, they didn't take out unskilled labor. They took out individuals, farmers who knew how to plant corn, who knew how to plant rice, who knew how to plant those agricultural products that you find in the Caribbean. So they would take your labor, skilled and unskilled, and from this skilled labor, they will begin to build America and they will begin to build Europe. So you now know they're taking your raw materials, they got your labor, skilled and unskilled, and your technology. What are some of the foundation of the so-called Industrial Revolution is what? Textiles and chemicals. Well, you know the African people have been weaving all kinds of textile products, cloth. So not only have we been weaving it, but we have had in our possession for thousands of years the technology of weaving. All those weaving looms and machines that you find that in the textile mills in America and the textile mills in Europe, they came from Africa. The exact prototype, the exact machines were taken, so when they went and raided, not only did they pull you away, pull your scientists away, pull your people away, but they took your machines. And it was those machines that would go in to make the spin engine here and all these inventions here. So they transferred from us not only the raw material, not only our physical body and the labor, but they transferred the technology. That technology transfer, primarily from Africa to the Caribbean, America, and Europe, is what started the so-called Industrial Revolution for European and white people, your textile. And we can go back to metallurgy, where the Industrial Revolution was when the Europeans began to learn how to make steel and how to smelt to get aluminum and copper. But you can go back to any part of Africa, West Africa, and you can see where we were smelting iron and brass and copper and tin and silver. Or you can go along the Nile. If you go to the trip with Dr. Ben, you will see where the Africans have worked in gold and silver and copper and bronze and platinum. So it's well documented that those industrial processes in metals that made the Industrial Revolution here came from the continent. The textiles, the textile industry, and all of the technology primarily came. It was the ability to, for 300 or 400 years, to drain from you your labor, your technology, and your resources that made America and Europe what it was. And if you go through the scenario, you would see Lloyd's of London, all of these big insurance houses in America and Europe, and didn't come into existence until after this process has occurred. So that's the foundation. So when you look at Lloyd's of London and Citibank and National Bank and Carnegie, where did the foundation come from? It came from number two. Your raw material, your technology, and your resources used to make Europe or white people in Western Europe strong and powerful. So there's almost nothing that you can look at in America where you can directly see where it came from this process. And that's why what brings America and Western Europe into 1900, a dominant economic power, dominant military power relative to the African, the Asians, and the brothers and sisters and others in the Caribbean. So when you're talking about the World Economic Order, you have to go back at least to that portion of colonialism. That's the foundation of the wealth of Europe and America. We're not going to deal with the white people from Eastern Europe because those white human beings called Russians went over the Ural Mountains heading west and equally did to those Asians what the Western Europeans did to us. So you had the white people split in two halves. Those you call Western Europeans, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, they left. They conquered what you call America, the Caribbean, and Africa, and the Pacific. But the other half of them, those white Russians, crossed the Ural Mountains from 1300 and began to conquer what is now parts of Pakistan, India, China, and they killed off and exterminated those people in Asia you call Eskimos, Ainus, people of color. That's how Russia got its power and its strength. So you had two parallels. But here we're going to deal with the western part. So as you begin to, and if you look at the map here, what we're saying is those Europeans from Western Europe came out in this portion and went in this direction. But you also had white people calling themselves Russians, who after 1300 began to cross the Ural Mountains. And in the age of conquest, what they were doing to us here, what they did was these white Russians went in and conquered these Asian people, the Iranians, the Pakistanis, the Mongolians, the Ainus, and others, and they, those white Russians from 1300 to present, conquered Asia. They came out of Asia and they went across and conquered Alaska. And the Russians were trying to almost conquer Hawaii. So you had a dual conquest on both ends. So anyone who tells you that the Soviet Union is your friend as European, look at the history, you see that's nonsense. Okay, so as we go on, you see the foundation. Now we go to number 3. And number 3 is labeled trilateral. And the trilateral means there are 3 sides. And since 1900, when as Europeans got together, they formed different organizations that they needed to project themselves. And the word trilateral just means 3 sides. And the 3 sides of the Trilateral Commission, and we'll expand on it later, is United States and Canada is one side. Western Europe is a second side. And they added Japan as the third side. Trilateral Commission was instituted about 1975. And they represent those countries who formerly had colonies and who band together to form colonies, band together to become strong. Let's go back briefly to see who the English are, the Spanish, the English, and the Germans. When you look at the history of Europe, approximately 400 AD, a group of Europeans coming from the northern part of Europe, which you call Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and what you call Russia and Denmark. They came down in a series of invasions starting at 400 AD and they smashed the Roman Empire. These invasions continued to push 500 AD, 600, 700, 800, 900, and they kept pushing down into Central Europe. When these groups of people who are beginning this invasion, they're called Germanic people. They will come in and exterminate the Europeans who are presently there, which were primarily Romans and Celts. Those Europeans you call Germanic people. 3 sets of these German people would go into what is now England or Great Britain. England and Great Britain was previously occupied by a group of Europeans called Celts, who are now survived as the Irish, the Scottish, the Welsh. So those...
Yeah, we're going to pause it right there. I got some rap for you. So, the question of white supremacy, brother was speaking on, I'm answering this question. But we're going to resume this lesson on the next video. In the meantime, study this video, all the videos that I'm making, and you see how pieces of the puzzle will fit together. Until then, have a peaceful, nice rest and an early morning rise. Black light.